Welcome to the DLAI Fintech Conclave 2023 podcast series brought to you by the Digital Lenders Association of India and India Fintech Diaries. The DLAI Fintech Conclave 2023 recently concluded on January 24th. It was a well-attended event with several interesting panels, workshops, and discussions. But what happened at the event? To give you a peek at the highlights of the event and key themes of discussion, we spoke with Presha Paragash, CEO of Credit Saison India. Prior to Credit Saison India, Presha was the founder of Credifiable, an asset-light digital lending platform in India. And prior to that, she co-founded Sol Primero, an early-stage investment firm in India. She also comes with strong expertise in mergers and acquisitions, having worked with UBS at their London offices in the investment banking division. I'm your host, DLAI Sarang, and this is India Fintech Diaries. Welcome back to India Fintech Diaries, the show where we discuss all things Indian fintech. Today, we wrap up our series with the Digital Lenders Association of India for the DLAI Fintech Conclave 2023, with a look at what happened at the event.
And to help us recap the event, we have with us Presha Paragash, CEO, Credit Saison India. Welcome to India Fintech Diaries, Presha.
Hey, hi Roy, hi Hemant.
Presha, you've had a very interesting journey into the world of fintech. Talk to us a little bit about your background and what you do.
Sure. So I'm currently the CEO of Credit Saison India. But my background-wise, I've always kind of had some sort of shape and form equation with the financial services industry. So I started my career with UBS. I was with their London office, focusing on mergers and acquisitions. After sort of spending, I would say, sort of good amount of time there, decided to sort of go on and do my MBA. Post my MBA is when I moved to India. When I moved to India, sort of started the journey in the investing side of things. So I co-founded a small seed stage investment firm, so focusing, did about 10 odd seed level investments. I think we realized fairly quickly that, more than the investing side was very interested. So that's when I sort of, to switch over and I started my own fintech startup. So my fintech startup was focusing, providing personal loans to salaried professionals. It's a good amount of time on it, but unfortunately realized that, it was not scaling up to the level that, it should really have scaled up at that point of time. So, took the decision to shut it down. But while I was sort of shutting it down, that was when Credit Saison was actually setting up in India. So thought was kind of like a perfect timing, given my background and everything. So I was one of the earliest hires for Credit Saison India. Been with the company now for about 4 years, and really sort of, been able to have I would say a really great journey to kind of build it out to where we are today.
That's pretty interesting, Presha. I'm curious about Credit Saison. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what Credit Saison is looking to do in India, and also maybe specifically also talk about your views on India as a space for digital lending and a market for digital lending to grow.
Sure. So just background wise, so Credit Saison is one of Japan's largest credit card issuers. About 8-9 years ago is when they set up sort of a global business team, that's based in Singapore. The whole idea was, with at least when they looked at it globally, they first thought that, when they enter, say, Southeast Asia, they would either enter through an equity investment or a joint venture. Post kind of making those sort of bets, when it came to India, they realized that, they really wanted an entity that, they would sort of fully own, fully capitalize. They've actually looked at India quite a few times. So actually before kind of setting up this whole business, we were one of the final contenders for SBI cards as well. Unfortunately, we were not successful on that bid. And that was actually the whole moment where we decided, okay, what would actually then be the right strategy for India? And I think it was at that very, kind of point of time where there was a lot of sort of activity and buzz on this whole fintech and partnership models that could sort of emerge. So the whole thesis of starting out in India was that the first focus would be to ensure that the group, gets an NBFC license. So, we applied for our license. We got our license in September 2019. Then the whole strategy for India was, we really want to look to build out a new lending conglomerate. But in order to do that, we sort of took the approach that we'll do it in a phased manner. So what I mean by that is that when we started lending in India, we first started out two business verticals. So the two business verticals we started was the partnership focus. So we either, do wholesale lending where, we provide debt directly to NBFC's balance sheet. The second vertical, and this vertical, has grown really, really well. This is where, we do partnerships with fintechs and co-lending arrangements. So it's through a tech-led integration, we're able to sort of scale up this partnership vertical. Sort of then 1 year ago is when we decided, that given these two verticals are growing really nicely, but for us to build, to really build out to be sort of a lending giant here in India, it's very important that we also have of our direct to market lending. So that's when we've launched two new verticals. So one is whereby, we're providing loans to MSMEs, unsecured loans to MSMEs. The fourth last vertical which we've launched is our own consumer lending app. So we have a consumer lending app by the name of Prevo, providing personal loans to, again, the consumer,
Right.
targeted consumers. Just a recap on, just a bit of our stats as well today. So, given that we've grown the business from scratch, so we currently have a book size of close to about 5,000 crores today. And, we are pretty much on target to hit about $1 billion in AUM over the next few months. Currently about 500 people here also in India. And I think really, really playing to that story that, that we look to set up, right? So really growing to be a new lending conglomerate here in India.
And Prisha, as Elroy asked, if you could also speak about the overall market and why you find the market is so interesting for Credit Saison, that would
Sure.
be great.
So I think, as mentioned, right, I think when, you're entering in a global perspective, right, so I think the first thing was the thesis on India overall, right? So I think
Right.
that thesis, very quickly, no sort of overseas investor, wants to miss out on India. So I think that sort of hits all the right macros when you're sort of considering India. But coming specifically to the lending space in India, I think when we look at it as well, as a global investor setting up in India, I think there's just no doubt of the kind of scale that you're able to kind of hit. But let me break that up as well, right? So if we look at it for us, is on the partnership vertical. When we saw the partnership vertical, we were very clear that, there's a lot of really, really sort of good quality fintechs or, NBFCs that we're going to be able to work with. But we're not only going to be able to work with them, but we're also going to be able to grow with them in scale and not necessarily compromising credit quality as well. Right. So I think the view on India was that, this is a market that, we don't want to kind of, be left out on. But on top of that, we were very, very bullish that, once we set up, we can really, really scale up with the partners. And then I talked about it as well, right? I think as a global MNC entry, setting up your own direct retail from day one is very difficult. Right. So that's why our view was very clear that, through the partnership, take a bit of time, build your capabilities. But as you then build out your capabilities, then going into your own direct lending is much easier, right? Because, you have the capabilities, in terms of your own underwriting, servicing, the collections, all those aspects, which is a very integral part in terms of how you're able to build sort of that mega loan book out as well.
Got it. Very interesting. Now, Prisha, coming back to DLAI Fintech Conclave 2023, you had a ringside seat of the conclave. So, talk to us about your impressions at the event and what were the delegates, digital lenders at the event most excited about? What topics garnered the most discussion across the not only the panels but side discussions and everything?
Sure. So I think, at the starting point, right, I think it was just incredibly energetic, right? I think these kind of conclaves are a great, great way that, you get sort of all the right stakeholders together. I think if you really look at the fintech ecosystem, right, so I think there's sort of 5 kind of key sort of stakeholders, right? So you have your banks and your NBFCs, then you
Right.
have your fintechs itself, then you have your data service providers, right? So this could be, say, your KYC, your banking, your bureau people and all. Then, you have your investors. And lastly, you have the regulator who's a stakeholder as well. Now, I think the first 4 kind of stakeholders, I think there was really good representation of them in the overall conclave. And I think there was just a general theme, right? Because the general theme here now is everybody is acknowledging the fact that we've really, as an industry, we've really been able to see kind of scale and the future for credit, right? So I think definitely there is a bit of sort of macro sort of, especially at a global level. But India, in terms of credit on what we're expecting to see, is very positive, right? So I think there's a lot of momentum going into the conference with respect to, what does the future sort of enable? And with that, what are going to be how do you enable this sort of future, right? And I think what's very interesting of these kind of conclaves, right, is that you can really tell in the fintech ecosystem, it's not skewed too much to a particular stakeholder, right? I
Right.
think this fintech, especially this lending ecosystem, there's a very great recognition that kind of all these five stakeholders that I mentioned are playing a very key role in advancing the ecosystem, right? So there's just a lot of chat, I would say, in terms of the theme, in terms of how would these kind of stakeholders continue to work together? Because it's no more at like 8 years ago, right, or 6 8 years ago, it was a lot more about getting started, right? I think we've passed that. Now it's about how, what does the future hold? How are these stakeholders going to work together to enable the future? And also, I think that was sort of a key theme that was driven out of this as well.
Interesting. And Presha, the event was also action packed with a number of panels during the day. So, what were some of the very interesting panels for you personally?
Yeah. So I think, as I said, right, I think they really tried to drive various agendas, throughout the panels and all, right? But I think if I was to look at the panel, right, one key theme that was being covered in the panels was that there was a lot of focus among everyone on responsible lending. So the panels today, nowadays, talk a lot about that. Coming to my earlier point, right, everybody is acknowledging the fact that there is scale, but everybody also, coming out of a COVID sort of environment is really wanting to ensure that as they build scale, they want to ensure that, they build sort of a resilient AUM as well. Right. So I think a
Right.
very, very key theme was this whole responsible lending, which you can see, right, was covered through, through the agendas of all the panels. That was just a general theme that kind of came out. I think, there was also a lot more in terms of the panels talking about the whole digital lending guidelines and, how is it that stakeholders will start working, with regulation and everything as well, right? So I think that also was a continued theme that was kind of driven through the panels. I think another interesting thing that was also being spoken a lot was now as an industry as well, right? Now a lot more focus on key metrics, right? And one key metric is definitely on profitability and unit economics, right? So I think that was another thing that was consistent across the panels as well. There was a specific panel that was, talking about serving the next 100 million customers.
Right.
I think that was also very interesting because that is now what the future holds, right? And if you really think about it, it's really about it coming together, right? Initially it was about how fintech would get set up. Now fintech has kind of come in, it's kind of proven its moat and ability, to really differentiate itself. But now the question is that can you enable credit for a larger customer base, right? So can you actually go after, that customer that really cannot get credit as well, right? So I thought that was also sort of an interesting panel theme that came out.
Presha also noticed that the event featured a number of female entrepreneurs and founders. In your opinion, how has entrepreneurship for female entrepreneurs changed then versus now? And what more can be done to improve it?
Yeah. So I think definitely, there's been a lot of sort of representation from women entrepreneurs. I think, personally, not just this industry and fintech, right? But I think just generally in India, it's been a very supportive and encouraging sort of environment to how can you enable woman entrepreneurship, right? But I think at the
Right.
heart of it as well, and again, this is a little bit more of my own biased opinion, right? I think the starting point is always merit, right? I think the idea has always been that, with merit, what is the better idea, right? So I think with merit, and then I think you drive and you enable to ensure that, that you are able to empower women and everything as well, right? So I think that continues to be able to hold as well.
Presha, as a parting thought, if you had to name five important takeaways from the conclave, maybe 3 to 5 important takeaways from the conclave, what would those be?
I think the key thing is how can you enable scale but
Right.
at the same token, be cautiously building that resilient book in lending as to enable scale, right? So I think that would be one key thing. I think the second thing is, definitely there's been a lot of positive enforcement with respect to the public infrastructure, right? So, with what Aadhaar has done, what UPI has done. But then I think there's a key question on what next, right? So is it going to be, what will AA sort of enable or already enabling? What will Open bring and all of that as well? I think another very key aspect throughout is that with fintech and especially in lending, what will now be the future and the real outlook, right? So, I think I kind of said there, right, that every while ago, Anderson Horowitz predicted that every company will be a fintech company, right? But
Right.
my personal thesis is that every fintech company will have a lending thing, right? But as we sort of enable and build out that lending, how can you do it by ensuring that you're putting out the right metrics, right? Because lending is inherently a very profitable business, right? But how do you ensure when you get into lending, right? How do you ensure that you build a profitable business? How do you ensure that you have a customer base? How can you engage with your customer base and everything, right? And I think the last sort of takeaway definitely from the conference was that definitely with lending, there's definitely a sense of responsibility that we all have to assume. This is in many shapes and forms. So it's either could be how we enable that lending, how we operate, and lastly also ensuring that there's that increased level of compliance that we are sort of taking very very seriously as kind of lending continues to grow.
That's very interesting, Presha. Thanks a ton for joining us today and taking us to what happened at the event.
Sure, perfect. Thank you so much for having me.
That's it from India FinTech Diaries this week. We will start a new theme from our next episode. So if you have suggestions for the theme that we should pick up, please send your suggestion across to us. So do stay tuned for more interesting conversation on India FinTech. And until next time, stay safe.